As you know, this is the measure of an episode.
Yeah.
Where it is our continuing mission to explore what makes Star Trek proper Star Trek and not just an Are You Afraid of the Dark ripoff. As you may not know, this is actually our 50th episode being recorded.
Not the 50th episode of The Measure of an Episode.
No.
Is it?
No, it's not. This is our 50th episode of watching.
Where we've watched 50 episodes of Star Trek.
You know what? I thought this was going to be a lot more exciting than it actually is. It's a lot more complicated.
I show up to this podcast every time thinking that.
Every time you hang up, you're like, that's supposed to go easier.
It's a disappointment.
Because of the two-parters, this is now the actual 50th episode of Star Trek that we've watched for this podcast. This is not our 50th podcast. This is the 50th episode that we've watched of Star Trek for the podcast. This is not our 50th podcast. I'm just going to keep repeating that.
Yeah, we like to make arbitrary waypoints for ourselves with any metric possible. So this is one of those.
Yes. And we are, what now? Not even at 10% of
not even close.
all Star Trek episodes. We're closer than we were when we started.
That's true. That is very true.
All right, so we do this using 3 criteria. And Paul, please tell us what they are.
Well, Jonathan, the first one, is there science fiction integral to the plotline? The second criteria is this science fiction demonstrated or expressed or executed in a novel way? Is there a new take on this science fiction? And 3, is there a question of morality demonstrated throughout the course of the episode? And this week, what did we watch, Jonathan? But there wasn't a fourth. I was like, is there a fourth criteria? No.
And some fourth criteria that we haven't come up with yet.
That we haven't figured out yet.
We'll just keep adding an unknown criteria. And we do this with 6 criteria. And the 7th, we don't know.
Right.
And this week, we watched The Haunting of Deck 12, which is season something of episode 6.
Wow. Remember that thing about me being disappointed every episode?
This is why. All right. And the episode we watched was The Haunting of Deck 12, which is episode 25 of season 6, yes? Yeah, season 6 of Star Trek Voyager. And
Nailed it!
First try. And the blurb says, Neelix becomes extremely agitated as Voyager begins a full shutdown before entering a peculiar astronomical nebula. You know what that tells me? That tells me that this is the guy who did all the DS9 blurbs.
Yep, because that's the first scene.
Right.
So we got the first scene squared away for everybody. Don't even have to watch it. Yeah, because he's not agitated ever again in the episode. Ever again. In fact, he seems to be, by the end of the episode, the most relaxed member of the crew.
Yeah. All right. So here's a question for you about our criteria. So our new criteria was presented in a novel or unique way. Yes, this one was. I wouldn't necessarily have done it this way. I think that the issue they had could have been presented outside of a flashback.
Well, that's the big question about this episode, is that if they had just written this episode as though it were just a regular episode and not done this storytelling kind of format, would it have been as good? And I felt, yes, it may have. You couldn't just cut out the Neelix stuff, obviously, and you would have an episode. But if they had just reworked it a little bit, it would have been fine. I felt like that the whole format of the Neelix telling the children a bedtime story type of thing didn't lean into it enough. There wasn't any time. Okay, so there's a couple of points where it's kind of obvious that it's Neelix telling the story. Like he gets some sort of scientific thing wrong that Ichep points out, and later in the episode he says, I knew this was just you made up the story because whatever because
of that mistake at the beginning,
collectors, yeah,
the Nadion emissions, yeah.
And I felt like this story should have been littered with those, where the kids either are pointing them out or trying to do some. It's more of a mystery, maybe. But they didn't. It's just him kind of narrating the thing, the narrating the episode.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I felt like it was too watered down of a concept for it to really be super novel. Although it's true, it is a novel way. Although I feel like it's a novel storytelling thing, especially for Voyager. But in terms of the science fiction, was that novel?
I mean, the science fiction part of it has been done before, where there's some kind of corporeal alien attaches itself to the ship. You know what? No, I think it is novel, because I think that every other time it's happened, which I think it's happened in every series before this, they just try to get rid of it. They don't actually try to return it.
Yeah, and I think that what they try and establish at a certain point is that it's not evil. It's not.
Right.
It doesn't have bad intentions.
Right.
It's just sort of a victim of circumstance or of some accident. And Janeway puts that together, I guess, near the middle of the episode,
Because she's so smart.
And yeah, she's very smart. But we're gonna get there. So, but I do agree. I mean, in terms of whether or not this meets all of the criteria, I do think that it does. I am a yes on this being a proper Star Trek episode. In fact, I think this is one of Voyager's best episodes that I've ever seen. Aside from the Neelix stuff, which I thought was half-baked, I loved it.
See, I thought the Neelix stuff, you're right. I thought it was half-baked. Like, I think that it could have been presented a little bit better. But I don't think... I didn't like how quickly Janeway figured it out, because she's so smart. And I also don't think Janeway should have been the one to figure it out, but she's so smart.
Well, you'd think that Neelix would present himself as being the one who figured it out, because there are a couple of different moments where he is an unreliable narrator, and which is where the part I think they should have leaned into. There are a couple of instances which we'll get to later in the plot, but I felt like, why not have it be a Neelix-centric thing where he is the hero of his story? But later in the episode, when he puts the kids to bed and comes back to real life, that we realize that it was a crew effort. It wasn't just Neelix saving the day. Like, for example, there is a point in this episode where Neelix is being instructed by Tuvok to go to his happy place, and he imagines his birthday party, where the entire command crew is surrounding him, singing him happy birthday, while the captain of the ship brings him his dinner, like she's some sort of waiter. Now, do we really think that it happened this way? Or is this Neelix just sort of
going to his happy place,
telling the story,
right, where everybody adores him, right?
Yeah. But he recounts that as though it really happened. So why not do that and have it, I guess, explained later in some way that that's not what happened. That's not how it goes. Right? That's not how we solve this problem.
I feel like it should have been, just because it was his story, we should have followed him the entire time, rather than him saying, meanwhile, Janeway was in engineering trying to get, and like it was more like, I don't think he should have been a part of the story at all. Almost like, I feel like it almost should have been just his part in the story should have been him telling them about these things that happened, like while he was on an away mission or something.
Or the other way around, it being entirely first person, where he's in every single scene and every single shot of the episode, where he can only recount things that he saw happen. So that's sort of the half-bakedness of it. It feels like it's sort of an afterthought, because he's just essentially narrating what's happening on screen, even if he's not in the room.
Right. So I was going to say that, but then I realized that would just be a whole lot of telling, not showing through the whole thing. So Ensign Kim comes into so I've been sitting in the mess hall for 3 hours wondering what's going on, when Ensign Kim shows up and explains to me, and like we do the flashback of Ensign Kim explaining everything that happened. But I guess it could be that, and Ensign Kim explained to me that, and then it would do the flashback to what Ensign Kim was explaining, and that way we'd get to see it. But I mean, then we're kind of doing a flashback of a flashback.
Well, it's a writing thing. You can write it in such a way where it's interesting, where you're still having somebody recount it in voiceover. Like that, but that's just a writing thing. You can do anything you want. You just
right.
Like, it can't be, as you said, it can't be explaining something that we then see. So, but it would have been more interesting to have it be first person, truly first person, in that we only get little snippets of hearing what the crew is doing, and maybe little snippets of what is actually attacking the ship, and him trying to figure out what's going on because nobody is telling him anything. And it's more of an adventure, more so than a trying to be creepy. I mean, the whole show is trying to signal this sort of ghost story type or ghost bedtime story type of thing, right? And in a good way. And so why not have it be more mysterious for Neelix? If we're choosing Neelix to recount this, why not have it be that?
Right. Well, and I feel like also with you saying that, there were some horror tropes in it, particularly in the mess hall, but it also, we shouldn't have known as an audience member early on that it was an alien. It should have been some kind of, like, we should have known that it came from the nebula, which I feel like we did very early on. And we shouldn't have known that it was an intelligent being. Like, it should have been almost like there was a haunting on the ship.
Yeah. It needed more setup because the whole premise of the haunting of Deck 12, it's not, we don't know what that means until the end when they have this throwaway line of, I told you Deck 12 is haunted.
Yeah.
And what are you talking about? No, you didn't. Nobody told us that ever.
Right. Not ever. Yeah.
Yeah. So it needed more setup in the sense if they were going to go with this horror thing of they needed 15 minutes of weird stuff happening and nobody knows why. But they don't do that because they needed to be a story that was recounted very quickly. Mm-hmm. But one thing I will say about the whole format is that it was executed really well. All of the photography, all of the music, everything seems very un-Voyager to me, where a lot of the typical Voyager stuff is kind of, I don't know, plain.
Yeah,
vanilla.
Yeah.
Kind of, the music, the photography. But this one was very well done. Like, you had a lot of sort of oblique shots of people where it was just sort of a profile, like when Neelix is talking to Tuvok at the beginning of his story, where he's trying to tell him, maybe you could put drapes on the wall. But it's all done in this kind of almost very The Shining kind of way, where they're not expressly trying to show you how creepy everything is, but everything surrounding the story is creepy. I don't know if I've told you this before, but I tend to like it when we're thrown into the middle of a narrative, as opposed to starting off cold with a narrative.
Oh,
Have
okay.
I said this before? Yeah, I don't know if
I mean, maybe off the podcast, but it sounds vaguely familiar.
Right. But so what would have happened? So we have this scene with Neelix where he's turning off where for some reason he has to turn off all the lights in the galley at the very beginning. Mm-hmm. And again, it's the only time we see him nervous, and nobody else is nervous.
Right.
And that never comes back. But what if we started the cold open with power going out in the cargo bay and the children have to disconnect themselves,
mm-hmm.
take out the butt plugs and just say, what's going on? And it started there, as opposed to having this thing at the beginning. I mean, it was a great sequence. I loved the sequence of the cold open where they're shutting down the ship. The whole sequence of them shutting the ship down is not out of fear or nervousness. Everybody's tentative about it,
right?
But you can tell that they all know what's going on, and they're not doing this out of necessity in the sense of survival, but they're doing it for some other reason that we don't know. And it was a great way to watch that's exactly what a cold open should be. But would it have been better to start the cold open with Neelix shutting down the cargo bay? If we're going to follow this format of him telling a story.
I kind of don't think so. Like, I think that the rush around would have it establishes the story and the conflict without telling us anything. Okay, so obviously there's something new that's happening and we don't know what it is. Whereas if it had started in the cargo bay, it would have been like we wouldn't have been jumping into the middle of it because Neelix would have been right there to explain what was happening.
I guess you're right. We wouldn't know what's happening. Yeah. Maybe that's a different episode that we would need it. That for the show to start with that cargo bay scene, it would need to be a different kind of episode. You're right. You're so right. By the way, so there's a point when the story is in, they have that whole setup with Janeway talking to the ship. But there's a scene where they call to the bridge and she's got her coffee cup that's empty. And she just hands it to some guy as she comes onto the bridge. She's like, "Ensign, here," and walks away. Did you see that?
No, I totally missed that. Right? Is that a cup that she got after trying
I don't know if
several
it's the
times?
first cup
Okay.
or the second cup, but she just walks and there's just somebody walking by trying to do their job on the bridge, and Janeway immediately turns him into a waiter and deputizes him as a waiter so she can get rid of her coffee cup.
Does she acknowledge that, or does she just hand it off to them and they take it?
I think she says, "Ensign, here."
But so what I was going to say about the flashback was, I think like I know this isn't the episode that they were going for, but it would have been a little bit more fun. Like I don't think they should have tried for the whole full on horror. I didn't read anything about like the production value of like why they wanted to do this, or if they just thought it would be fun to do it in this direction, or if the director decided like let's do a few rewrites to do it this way. But I think it would have been a little bit more fun as a genuine like campfire tale where they are telling the story, where Neelix is telling the story, and all of the crew are being voiced by him because he's telling the story.
A la Ant-Man or something like that.
But then one of the kids would say, that's not what they would do, or that's not what happened. Here's what happened. And then it goes back and it's now one of the kids doing the voices.
Yeah, that would be awesome. See, that would be fun.
Right.
That'd be really fun because obviously the kids are smarter than Neelix.
Right.
Neelix knows that.
Yeah. See, and I think, like, hearing you say that, I was going to agree, but I think it's more along the lines of he's actually really smart when he's given the information, but he's not always given the information. So, he's left as an aloof doofus. Because usually when he has the information, he's able to piece more together, or he's able to figure things out on it for himself or for others.
Maybe you're right. Maybe everybody hates Neelix so much they don't want to talk to him, so he doesn't have any information, so he comes off that way.
Yeah.
But in the episodes where he actually does contribute to the safety or progression of the ship, he does seem to know what he's talking about.
Right.
In terms of, usually it's diplomacy with other life forms, I guess, or other races in the quadrant.
So I think when he's given the information, he is able to figure things out. It's kind of like, just Janeway, man. Like, she is the smartest person in the room. Like, we don't have a room of the smartest people in the room. Oops, sorry about that, bang.
I guess I'm going to know what that means when I'm editing.
But, like, she's the one who figured this out. Like, she didn't tell Chakotay anything on those 2 missions that we've seen now. She's like, you were supposed to play the idiot, and you did it surprisingly well. Or you did it just as well as I expected you to, or like something like that. Right. And you nailed the part. Right. And same thing with Neelix. Like, he has proven time and again that when given the information, he's able to figure things out. But she's like, you're just the cook. Like, we don't need you for anything else.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, Janeway is
she's
sort of
smart.
Well, she's very smart, and she is very unbalanced. Not psychologically, although that is true. But I mean, in terms of how they represent her as a character, she doesn't seem to have any flaws through which the rest of the crew fills in. She constantly gives the chief engineer things to do that she didn't think of. She's constantly giving Tuvok ways of getting around she's always has the right answer.
Right.
And
she's so smart.
You're right.
Well, yeah, like in this episode specifically, I don't think that she should have been the one to figure out that the alien was trying to communicate with her.
It should have been Neelix. Neelix, I mean, that's what I would have done because he's telling the story.
Right.
Why not have it be Neelix? He's in the room. He's like, well, it sounds like he's trying to contact you, Captain.
Right.
Know? And I don't know. It felt, you're right. It should not have been her. I think she was too omnipresent in this episode. She's too omnipresent all the time, it seems like.
In Next Generation, they have that round room discussion where everybody's presenting the information they have. And then now with all the information, the people who are the smartest people in the room for that thing, they're like, well, wait a minute, what if it's this? Or somebody says to Geordi, well, could we do this? And he's like, oh, you mean like, here's an analogy so the audience knows? Yeah, I think we could try that.
Yeah, but he has actual purpose in the room and not just he's not asking the questions to Janeway. Whereas in Janeway's command conferences,
that's what they are. Yeah.
Yeah, she's always just sort of giving all the right answers to questions posed by the actual experts in the room.
Right.
Yeah, you're right.
She's just so smart. That was the part that really upset me in this episode was just like she had her entire crew in engineering, and then the alien starts calling out to her, and she's like, wait, I think it's trying to communicate. And I think even B'Elanna was like, no, it's just a glitch. And she's like, well, yeah, but what if you're wrong? Speaking of horror, like there's as far as I can think, there's only been one Star Trek episode where someone has genuinely died from the horror experience, and that was the person on Next Generation who phased through the floor.
It would have, I mean, the only way you could have made that more creepy is if they were still alive, you know?
Yeah.
For a second, you know, then they die. I don't think that would have made it onto the Star Trek
Right,
show.
right. I always wondered how they got rid of that body.
They probably beam everything out. You know what I mean? Just beam everything.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a lot better than what I thought.
What, do you think they had to like get a pickaxe or something?
Yeah, like just, you know, and just, you know, take off that top half that's there.
And then put the carpet back over it?
Yep.
Oh, that sounds great. Yeah.
That's
Nobody uses that. They all walk around it every time.
Well, I mean, for a while there's going to be a stain. Like
there's no stains in Star Trek unless it's the first
coffee
Star
stains
Trek.
on the bridge, like you were talking about.
Yeah, those are true. But they fixed that.
Right. When they built a whole new ship.
Exactly. We had a stain problem on the last ship. We need to fix that problem.
Time to get a new ship. That stain's never coming out.
Yeah. So going back to the science fiction, so there actually was, I mean, this happened a couple of times, but one that really did stick out to me is that at the beginning when they're I guess they're leaving the nebula after, you know, bad stuff happened, and Janeway notices that they are passing that whatever cluster again, which was kind of a fun moment. I was like, oh, a curiosity,
yeah,
an intrigue,
right? Like, yeah,
tell me more.
Mm-hmm. Thought there might have been a time loop or something. Yeah,
I was like, where is this going?
Right.
And so it's set up that the navigation sensors are not working, and so they stop immediately, and they make a big deal out of it, and they totally would in real life, because they aren't navigating by line of sight. They're not navigating through a window. They're not navigating through the feel of the ship, as much as they like to talk about how Tom Paris and how much he likes to talk about how all he needs is just a stick and a window and he can get him anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Not true when it comes to space travel. When you have, my doorbell just rang. When you have a ship that is spanning thousands of light years at the ridiculous speeds that they're going, they would at all costs have to make sure that their navigation instruments are working, and they may be the most important sensors on the ship in terms of if the purpose of a ship is to move through space,
right?
Because any miscalculation by several decimal points
mm-hmm.
would put you off in the middle of nowhere,
right, from
where you wanted to go. And I liked, I mean, they don't go into it, but I really liked that they took whatever it was, 15, 20 seconds, and addressed that problem. Right. It was cool. I mean, it was a moment of, this is how things would be on a real ship if something like this existed. Right.
I wonder how often the navigation system goes offline. Or, you know, has those kind of technical issues.
That would have to be one of the most robust sensor arrays on the ship.
Right. Sorry, I mean in the series, like just in Star Trek in general. How often is that a conflict? You know, and how do they handle it? You know, are they like shields up, red alert? Oh.
Well, it happened again. I mean, we've talked about this before, where something's happened. We need to get out of here. Okay, go to warp. I can't go to warp. Engines are offline. It's like, well, that's convenient. Every time, like, what do we have these engines for? They're always going offline at the least inopportune time. Most inopportune?
Least opportune, most inopportune, yeah.
There you go, yeah.
The least inopportune time is like, that's great.
Right on schedule. Somebody just rang my doorbell. Hang on, let me go check, make sure there's nobody just waiting out there singing carols.
Okay.
This whole episode is kind of littered with those little moments where they are being, you know, peppering it with little science fiction moments. I mean, I didn't even watch this at double speed. I watched it at regular 1 speed. That's how much I like this episode.
So I watched the first 10-15 minutes at 1.5 speed. And then I had to leave and come back to it. And it started at normal speed. And yeah, same thing. Like, I didn't realize until the last 5 minutes that I had been captivated and watching it normal speed.
Right.
You know, which I mean, you know, for Star Trek in general, like it's pretty good to, like, most episodes are solid and you can watch them at normal speed. But I feel like Voyager in particular, they just have a tendency to technobabble a lot and just have those establishing moments or moments where characters are recapping, and so to really have it move along at a decent clip, you should be watching it at 1.5 speed. So yeah, I feel like this one was presented in such a way that at normal speed, like it was captivating enough. Yeah, it was engrossing.
I have one gripe about the whole storytelling format, I guess.
That we haven't covered?
Seems, okay. Oh yeah, yes. I know. There's more. So there's just something insensitive about Neelix telling a scary ghost story about the thing that's happening to these children during the thing, like this dangerous thing. I mean, we learned that it's not necessarily dangerous, but we're led to believe it's dangerous. And I guess Neelix is nervous, and so we must think that it's dangerous. But why isn't he telling some sort of happy, fun story? Because it's sort of like if someone were telling a story about drowning children while they were on the Titanic while it was going down.
Right. So I thought that initially as well, but I think in his flashback, he was talking about why he was scared. You got that part, right? Like he was scared because there was that other ship that was floating in space, and there was a gas leak, right. And they had lost all their oxygen supply was diminishing, and they had to choose who was going to suffocate by drawing the shortest straw. Right. waiting for rescue, and so that's why he was nervous. And in his story, he didn't know what was happening and what was going on. Like in Voyager, he didn't know that there was this gas life form, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, see, that's the weird part to me, that the kids didn't know this was happening, because at a certain point in the narrative, they evacuate the ship, and I like so they must have remembered this happening.
No, he said this is before you came aboard at the beginning.
He did?
Yeah.
I thought this was something that was happening. So they've been harboring this alien for months?
Right. Yeah, they've been harboring them since like the beginning of season 6. Yeah. We didn't see the episode, but that's when it must have happened, because that's when the kids came on board.
Oh, I totally missed that.
Yeah. So he said like this all happened before you came on board, and then he's telling the story. So at this point, he knows about the nebulous gas that's being held. The part that doesn't make sense, though, then is him being nervous in the mess hall, because they right. should have known that this was coming, that this was happening, like everybody did, and right. maybe he just didn't want to be left alone in the mess hall because it's a big place.
Yeah,
but
I guess everybody's scared of the dark. I guess not everybody,
right.
but some people are scared. You're scared of the dark, so It would be funny though, is that if this did take place somewhat contemporaneously with them being on the ship, that. So they get when they're about to evacuate the entire ship, Chakotay and he says, "Everybody out of the ship except the first officer and the captain." And then it cuts immediately to the cargo bay of them regenerating in their cargo hold. And then it cuts back to them. It just seems weird that they would have been harboring this alien who essentially could take control of the ship whenever it wanted to throughout the entire season of episodes that happened.
Because it was episodic. And they didn't want anything that would foreshadow or call back to things that you needed to know. Like they didn't do that, and that's one of the things that I've always found disappointing about episodic shows.
That they can do stuff like this, where this was happening the whole time, you just didn't know about it.
Right.
I don't know. I understand that when you write an episode like this, you have to do that. And obviously they were not written with this, the whole season 6 was not written with this in mind. We can't go back and comb through season 6 looking for these little Easter eggs of like, well, this Nebula thing is coming up.
Right,
you guys, it's obviously not going to be there. But that's what I like about shows like Breaking Bad, mm-hmm. where you can do that. And Arrested Development is probably the best at this.
Yeah.
Where they were planning this stuff. All those little bits that come up, they were seeded.
Mm-hmm.
Even
mm-hmm.
the small stuff, they seeded it.
And the other part with Neelix at the end, like him telling the ghost story, I think the idea was to keep the kids captivated, because he said like it's been 3 hours, and so the story, he kind of drew out a little bit more and kind of knew like when they were wrapping up, so he kind of got near the end of it, so he could finish things up like kind of right around when the lights came back on.
That is true. He wasn't cock blocked by the lights coming back on. That would have been awesome. We just don't know what happened. It's like, well, the lights came back on, back to bed.
Right.
Well, there is the thing about that where they set it up as though, okay, was he making up the story or wasn't he? And it would have been nice if there was a question about that. If they had designed the episode in such a way where, maybe he wasn't telling the entire truth, or what was going on? Like if there was some question as to whether or not this was just Neelix spinning a yarn.
Well, yeah, and it could have, like, he didn't have to say, "I hope it lived happily ever after." Like that was the nail in the coffin. Like that just solidified it that for sure it was. Yeah. Or they could have added a little bit more to it, having Janeway say, like, "You hope what lived happily ever after," or something like that, and just leave it at that.
Or they just give him a weird look.
Yeah, like it just comes in on him
ambiguous.
where he's like kind of got a happy smile on it, and he's like, is he imagining that that's how the story ends, that it got released, or is he just satisfied that like he managed to keep them entertained the whole time because he just got accolades from Janeway, who he's got a crush on, and she's so smart?
Right. Well, it's because she's so smart.
Well, yeah. Oh, that's why he's got a crush on her?
Yes.
Right.
I think what would have handled the whole beginning scene that doesn't make sense as to why he's so nervous at the very beginning when we're shutting everything down. I think I would have handled it for me if he had said, "Look, we Talaxians don't like the dark. We live in the desert where there's no dark, where there's no nighttime. And so darkness is not very fun for us Talaxians." That would have been fine.
Right.
It takes 5 seconds to say and handles the whole, "Look, I sleep with the lights on.
Yep.
What do you want me to do?"
And did you hear your favorite thing? I think it was on the bridge where they said like it's as hot as a Moncarian desert.
God. We'll do the desert math that it's hot. You don't need it. We don't know. It doesn't have to have some stupid name before it. Who does that? I want to know. I mean, because the writers must get sick of that stuff. Who are the sort of the everyday writers doing this stuff? Are these hand-me-down notes from executives? Like, there's not enough Star Trek in this. They have to have alien names.
Yeah, probably. I mean, it could also be that it happened very early on, and so now the writers either do it as a running gag or as just kind of a CYA. Like they're like, well, it's got to be in there, so let's just put it in. They're gonna tell us to put it in anyway.
There was another trope that I don't know how this happened. I mean, if you go down the long road of thinking this kind of trope out, it just makes zero sense. Which is, so Chakotay is going to rescue Seven of Nine from asphyxiating because the alien has enclosed the area with force fields that they can't penetrate, right? Mm-hmm. And she's suffocating. We need to get in there. I've tried to unlock it. Chakotay has given his code and it doesn't open. So he's like, "Stand back."
So he blasts
and he
it,
shoots
right?
He shoots the panel. It's like, what? I understand that working with a regular physical lock. The lock is holding it in place. You pulverize the lock. It doesn't work anymore. You can open the door. But what is the point of there being security at all, where if you can just shoot at the closest panel and it brings down whatever force field you're having?
Right.
Is that the magical key? It's like, well, it's a back door that we programmed in. We're not proud of it, but
the heat and wavelength of the phaser releases all electronics and puts everything back to normal.
We fired the guy that made this, okay? But you guys are out in the middle of nowhere. We can't give you a new one.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. Which I'm trying to remember, like, it, again, like, not to go back to the pinnacle, but like I'm trying to remember if there's ever a time where Next Generation does that, like they blast it to unlock the electronics. Because I would think if you were to shoot a control pad like that, it would put up the force fields like as a default.
Like shooting back. So you just have a little shootout,
right?
Chakotay with the panel. Yeah, I mean, yes, I don't know. I mean, shouldn't everything on the ship be phaser proof anyway?
Well, but what's phaser proof? Like phaser absorbent or phaser reflectant?
Yeah, or whatever.
Well,
however they choose to
I feel like
handle
phaser reflectant would be extremely dangerous.
Well, they shouldn't have been shooting it indoors anyway.
I hope you know this is your fault that the entire crew is either dead or amputated.
Oh, they have doctors. They can fix that stuff.
That's true. Just ask the
like
Picard.
Tom Paris disappears throughout the episode. I guess because he gets burned.
Yeah.
Badly.
Yeah.
He was like...
He was badly burned.
Yeah. He was effed up, dude.
Yeah. I mean, I guess electricity to the face will do that, but...
He had so much time, too. Janeway's like, "Paris, there's a overload in your panel. Get away from that." What's that thing? There's an overload in your panel.
Right,
Step away from the thing. I'm sorry, one more time. He had so much time.
There's an overload in this panel? This panel right here? The one that I'm touching?
Yeah.
No. It doesn't feel warm. Hang on, let me put my face against it.
Yeah, I don't feel anything.
But just can you... Oh, man, the amount of pain that he... Like, his entire face has just been electrically burned. and he now has to.
Electricity? I guess it is.
He now has to climb down the ladder to get to sickbay.
Yeah, and he burned his arms and hands too.
Right. Well, and then he lays down, and the doctor's like, "We can't stay here." And they're like, "Get back up, Paris. Here we go."
Yeah, poor Paris.
I know.
They fixed him. They fixed him up good.
Yeah, they did. I mean, by the next episode, he looked. Oh yeah, actually, by the end of this episode.
Yeah, he looks fine.
Well, I guess
it's great.
I guess by the next episode after this, which was like season 6, episode 4. Yeah, he looked great. All right. So what was the moral and ethical dilemma in this episode?
Well, there wasn't an explicit conversation where the alien learns that life is precious and that cooperation, that we need we need other people no matter how different we are,
right?
to help each other.
Mm-hmm.
It was sort of that thing like, we can help you, but you just have to do one thing for us and just not kill us first.
Right.
And it wasn't explicit, but I felt like the alien learned that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. So
you buy that?
Yeah. Yeah. You bought that?
Yeah, damn. No takesies backsies.
Stamp it. It's done.
Yeah, I mean, it's not concrete, I guess, but
well, and
it's
not
enough
every
for me.
episode is going to be heavy-handed with the moral or ethical dilemma. It just needs to be present in the episode.
Right.
And I think, I think if we discussed it enough, we would be able to find it there. And I think you're right. It's something along those lines of just recognize like the nebula needed to,
it needed her.
Yeah,
it wasn't. He or she or it could not just bend these people's wills to its whim.
Right.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah.
That it needed to cooperate, to coexist, as it were. And I think it learned that. Because obviously it learned it. If it was just on board, cohabitating on the ship with the other humans, it must have learned that. In fact, it may have had some relationships along the way.
Yeah, that would be kind of cool.
With Geordi.
If if it actually did become part of the computer. And just the computer became
great. What if it's like, hey, we have a nebula for you. No, I like it here.
Right.
And I can help you guys.
That would have been neat. Yeah, like I like that you're exploring, because it's been with them for the entire season essentially. And it would have been cool if that's how the episode ended, where, I mean, obviously because we didn't see it, it was very episodic, like it's not going to end that way, but this is what I'm saying about like Pike and Strange New Worlds. Like there's so many things that happen in Star Trek like this where it would be so cool if they didn't reset. If they just they had these things that actually changed the ship or the crew in different ways, and not in huge altering ways that like what happens in Discovery, but just all the characters grow and the ship changes because it got attached by a space jellyfish, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, did you like the episode?
I did. Yeah, I mean I enjoyed it, and I would say like it's a good episode to watch. You shouldn't skip it. I think that it could have been tweaked to just be that much better. But I don't think that there was anything super aside from that moment where Janeway figured everything out on her own because she's so smart.
Yeah, it's a good microcosm of what we were talking about earlier, of how television is today versus how it was 20, 30 years ago, in the sense of episodic versus serial. Where I got to the end of this episode wanting there to have been more exploration as to the premise.
Yeah.
And I didn't get that because it's an episodic episode.
Right. It had to
episodic.
Yeah. Conflict had to be presented in the first couple minutes and had to be resolved in 45 minutes. Yep.
And Janeway had to be the hero. That has to happen at a certain point.
Right. Because she's so smart. All right. Well, let's see what's on. Generator, you've done it again.
What is it?
TNG, The Next Generation, Star Trek, The Next Generation, Season 5, Episode 22. What was it?
There you go.
Okay.
Yep, that's right.
All right. Episode 22, Imaginary Friend. A child who recently moved onto the Enterprise begins playing with an imaginary friend, but the new playmate begins affecting the ship's operations.
Maybe this is the prequel to the Voyager episode we just watched.
Right?
But unlikely. Although this does not sound like a good episode. I may be proven wrong, which I often am. But because it just doesn't sound fun.
Yeah, I vaguely remember this one, like the child. It's a little bit the child gets upset that people are either blaming her or blaming her imaginary friend, and she says stuff like, you don't want to make it mad, or you're making him mad, or something like that. and I think that like it becomes a threat, and they have to try and figure out how to stop it. I don't remember the specifics behind it, but I feel like it is very much in the same vein of what we just watched.
Right. Well, hey, we've known this the whole time about the generator.
Right.
So it's not like we can keep being surprised about it.
Maybe the generator is now trying to tell us that this is what it is.
Maybe.
It's found the Star
Possible.
Trek episodes that it's like, hey, I'm the ghost in the machine, guys.
It's trying to communicate with us. We need Janeway, though, to parse this out for us.
I know. She's so smart.
Okay, let's go watch it.
Okay.